The iMore Show is brought to you today by Betterment, the automated investment service built on the idea that investing intelligently should be intuitive, automated, and accessible to everyone, whether you have $10,000 or $10 million. Over 36,000 customers already using Betterment's user-friendly web and smartphone applications to improve their returns, save time and money, and minimize their taxes. For a limited time, listeners can get up to 6 months of free automated investment management by visiting betterment.com/iMore. It is July 17, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk about Apple plus IBM in the enterprise and everything that is going on in the consumer world. This is the iMore Show. Joining me today, we have the executive editor or managing editor of all the editors of iMore.com, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Good, Rene. How are you?
Good, thank you. And we have the managing editor of MobileNations.com, Derek. I almost called you Derek Sexler.
That's what all the ladies call me.
That is an incredibly inappropriate way to start this show. I apologize to small children and pets. Derek Kessler, how are you? Yeah, especially the pets. How are you, Derek? It's this topsy-turvy world. If either of you had told me a week ago that Apple was going to be announcing a sweeping, I tell you, partnership with IBM of all people, I would have thought you'd be mad. Mad. What's going on here, Peter?
I still don't believe it.
What's going on? Well, the bottom line is that things have changed. IBM was kind of positioned as the big bad enemy 30 years ago when Apple introduced the Macintosh, but things have changed a lot over the years, and IBM and Apple are in cahoots with each other, in bed with each other. I'm not exactly sure what the right way to put it is.
Well, they had the PowerPC Alliance before, right?
Yeah, the PowerPC Alliance, which of course was sort of a triumvirate. It was Apple, IBM, and Motorola working together to create this RISC-based microprocessor that Apple famously used in the Macintosh, the Power Mac line, and all the other Macs that came out around that time. Apple has a long history of collaborating with IBM in interesting ways, but this is a completely different situation. This is dedicated apps that are designed for enterprise. These are cloud services. This is Apple Care support for enterprise, packaged services from IBM, all designed to sort of create a gestalt that's more than the sum of its parts between Apple and IBM. It's pretty exciting, not only for Apple watchers, but also for people who keep an eye on the enterprise space, because Apple has been making inroads and has had inroads to enterprise for a long time with iOS products, especially with the rise of bring your own device protocols that have been happening at corporations all over the world. But IBM, this is their bread and butter. So to have Apple partnering with IBM here it gives them greater clout in the enterprise, I think, than they've ever had before.
Okay, so I want to deep dive into some of the stuff that was said here, because I think we're going to have to provide some enterprise to human translation to a couple of the announcements. But Derek, I just want your quick take, and it's fascinating to me because a few years ago you were running this beautiful little website called WebOS Nation. Palm, was making arguably the most elegant, sophisticated operating system around, and then HP got into a sweeping partnership with them.
Yeah, and although it wasn't so much a sweeping partnership as HP just bought them. But HP's goal was to bring that, Palm was a consumer device, and to help bring that into the enterprise. And they probably could have if they'd been willing to stick with it, but that's a whole nother story. It really still surprises me just to see it's very much a different Apple than the Apple of 3 or 4 years ago. I still have trouble processing that they're in a partnership with IBM now, even though IBM, for the majority of the time that I've been writing about tech, hasn't been involved in any of the same areas as Apple.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they stress. So there's a couple really interesting things before we deep dive into it. One is that if you want to go into the enterprise, there's not that many people you can go to who have deep enterprise experience. There's HP, but I'm going to use the beleaguered word with HP at this point. There's Oracle, and Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison were famous friends. So there's Oracle. They're more of a database in origin, and IBM's more of a mainframe in origin, but still. There's SAP, who, their worst CEO ever became HP's worst CEO ever. And they've bought Sybase and all these other companies. So there's a few alternatives here. But Apple went with IBM, and of course, everyone immediately put up that famous picture of Steve Jobs flipping off the IBM logo. I think Peter said that was, 30, 20 years ago at least, Peter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 30 now. I mean, Apple's 1984 ad, of course, that was 30 years ago. 30 years ago last January, that Apple sort of took IBM by the horns and made them the enemy. And of course, Apple at the time was on the ropes. It's easy to forget now, but there was a personal computer market before the Macintosh came out, before Windows came out. And that PC market was at one time dominated by Apple. Apple IIs were everywhere. Apple IIs were in school. Apple IIs were at work. Apple IIs.
I had one in my house.
Yeah, exactly. I used them in high school back in the 80s. And that was a cutting-edge computer lab. At the time. So IBM realized that it had misstepped, realized that it had sort of ignored the PC market, saw the PC market as a burgeoning market, which it was, and came out with its own IBM PC, and they sold like hotcakes. And within a fairly short period of time, IBM dominated the PC market, and Apple was on the ropes. So the Macintosh was Apple's attempt to kind of get back into relevance by trying something really new and something really different.
And the world changed significantly, for IBM as well, because while they owned the original PC, they didn't actually own it. And Microsoft was able to take DOS originally and then Windows and use software along with commodity hardware to completely change that. And IBM is not the company that sold typewriters. It's not the company that sold PCs. It is now a company, to your earlier points, that has no, like Derek said, that it has no consumer-facing technology. They sold their laptop division to Lenovo, the ThinkPads, which were excellent.
And that was in 2005.
Yeah, they have completely...
It's been 9 years since they've been in direct competition with Apple.
It's remarkable. So that's a couple of things I want to take a look at here. So Tim Cook, and I'm going to make sure I get her name right, the president and CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, did the tour. And let's go through this a little bit, because I think the entire thing is actually pretty fascinating. So they announced a landmark deal, and the whole goal of this deal is for IBM to get better devices into the enterprise and Apple to have better services once their devices are in the enterprise. So here are the talking points. A new class of more than 100 industry-specific enterprise solutions, including native apps developed exclusively from the ground up for iPhone and iPad. So this isn't like 100 apps, this is 100 solutions. And enterprise loves to talk in terms of solutions. They love to sell packaged solutions. If they can say this is a thing for that, this is our financial services solution, this is our logistics and supply chain solution, this is our, whatever vertical they can slice up, if they can have a prepackaged, ready-to-go solution for that, they love that. So what I'm not sure about here, though, Derek, is whether these are actually, there are probably going to be some apps in here, but it's probably going to be a lot of marketing enterprise-y speak, I think, is the actual packaging involved.
I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you anything about what goes into such a package. My experience in that's kind of limited. But I can see, they might have some. There'll be it'll mostly be, I'd say, hardware would just be the iPhones and the iPads and maybe an IBM server blade if they still make those. But it's mostly going to be, I think, software solutions with the building apps that are able to tie in together into their corporate cloud in a way that most businesses can't do on their own right now.
Is that it, Peter? Is it giving a better device face to the solutions IBM's already offering?
Well, a big chunk of IBM's business is consulting, and giving businesses the support that they need. And we're talking about a huge company. We're talking about a company with a market cap of around $190 billion. They've got a huge amount of assets, a huge amount of income in the market, and they spin off businesses that are hugely successful. Spinning off ThinkPad to Lenovo is a good example. Spinning off Lexmark back in the early '90s. Their business has certainly changed, but yeah, they've got a huge amount of business in cloud computing, consulting to major corporations, and other enterprise stuff. So yeah, I think it's a good match. I think Apple's got a consumer-facing business that anybody would be very envious of, but it's something that's picking up more and more weight in enterprise. And in this particular case, I think that the arrangement that Apple and IBM have come up with benefits both parties a great deal.
So there's a couple things that I think are interesting, super interesting there. One is that, and I think Tim Cook even said this at one point, Apple has great breadth in enterprise. If you listen to WWDC, Craig Federighi said that Apple has 98% penetration into Fortune 100 and Global 100 companies. But that could be one iPad. I mean, it's probably more than that. But just in terms of a literal analysis of that statement, that could be one iPad per business. So they have breadth, but they don't have depth. And nor does Apple. Maybe Apple could make a dedicated enterprise sales force, but that's not their forte. That's not their core strength. That's not their core business. That is exactly what IBM does. That's IBM's wheelhouse. That's something they know how to do. If they're doing those consulting gigs that Peter talked about, them writing in 20,000 iPads as part of that, I don't want to say it's chump change, but that's the kind of way that enterprise works. Here's your solution delivered on this, whether it's delivered on Blade servers or it's delivered on iPads, that's part and parcel of the cost of delivering that solution. Now, Peter, when you said the consulting thing, I don't know if you've ever watched House of Lies.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely.
So I worked in enterprise for a long time, and anyone who's worked in enterprise for a long time can tell you that show is not fictional.
Yeah, that's true.
Consultants basically exist to come in, you give them like 10 grand, and they'll talk nicely about other customers, or they'll include you in reports, or they'll do, maybe it's not 10 grand, maybe it's 100 grand, or whatever. There's all sorts of ways in which they attach themselves remora or leech-like to you and suck out your money. I'm not saying that's IBM, but I'm just saying that consulting is a huge part of enterprise, and there are things that they can absolutely do better than dedicated divisions and people inside a company. But they make themselves indispensable. You're basically hiring out IBM to do stuff that you're not doing yourself, and with that could now come the Apple stuff. And what's interesting there too, Peter, is that they said they're going to walk AppleCare in as part of this.
Yeah, and AppleCare is a big deal for Apple. I think AppleCare netted Apple $2 billion last year. Right now, AppleCare, at least on its face, AppleCare is something that you really associate with consumer purchases of computers, but a lot of businesses buy, or not just computers, but also AppleCare Plus for iPhones and iPads. But certainly a lot of businesses are buying these devices, and they need the additional coverage as well. So the AppleCare is still being executed by Apple, but IBM is actually involved with implementation. I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting in a couple ways too. I mean, they stressed, both Tim Cook and I'm going to say her name wrong again, Romedy, I think that's how you say it. Stress that they're both global companies, and they talked about how, and I'm going to get these words right because I haven't spoken enterprise in a while, and it really is a different language. Unique IBM cloud services optimized for iOS, including device management, security, analytics, and mobile integration. Now, Derek, a couple of those. I mean, we've seen the Samsung Knox stuff. We've seen Google say they're going to be using the Samsung Knox stuff. Your favorite device company in the world, BlackBerry, is famous because of their device management stuff. Yeah. This seems to go right against all of that.
How so?
Well, so Apple right now depends mostly on third-party device management. There's a minimal utility that Apple provides for enterprise management, but there's companies like, I think it's called Mobile Iron, and there's companies like Good that do all of...
So you're saying it goes up against that?
Yeah, it provides Apple essentially with services that BlackBerry would rather people buy from them.
Right, and this is part of Apple has historically struggled with cloud services. It took them, like 18 tries to get it right when they finally got to iCloud. So they know that necessarily isn't yet their expertise. But when they can just say partner up with IBM, and IBM brings, hey, we know how to do this stuff. Here's how we do it, and they're bringing to the table something that Apple may have been working on, but are able to deliver on it a lot faster before other businesses or their competitors are able to establish a stronger foothold. And they've realized that with BlackBerry's not doing fantastically well right now, that
But the one place they are doing well is enterprise.
To wedge themselves in.
Yeah, so the one place they are still doing well is enterprise. I got to think that this was the worst possible press release for John Chen to wake up to.
Yeah, I'm sure he wasn't totally thrilled to be reading that or watching his stock price.
Well, so that's, I mean, we're not Chris Parsons, we're not Kevin Mitchelluk, we're not Chris Umiastowski. I don't have a great grasp of BlackBerry, but I got to think, I mean, this market really is, that famous Ed Colligan quote, these PC guys aren't going to just walk in here and take over mobile. Apple's not walking into enterprise, they have IBM walking them into enterprise. And I think they could do some damage there. I think if I was BlackBerry, I'd be concerned because it's my last stronghold. But I think that if I was Android and Samsung, their knock stuff has not been successful as far as I know in any way, shape, or form yet. And it's not apparent to me how they could equalize this. Like, I mean, Google's in massive lawsuits with Oracle. They're not going to team up with Oracle. I don't know if they could team up with SAP. I don't know if there is an equal or opposite maneuver they could do here.
No, I mean, really, right now, there's BlackBerry, Good, Oracle, and IBM. And I don't think that there's anybody else that's really a major player. I saw something at Samsung. Samsung admitted that they have less than 1% share, which is saying that they have nothing. I think there was one school in like Paraguay that signed up to use Knox. But I don't think I've seen any other press releases on anybody else who has. That's not to say that it's not a bad solution, and Google's clearly sees something in it that they're adopting it, building it into Android L and whatnot. But with the state of where it is, and what is supported, I know BlackBerry Enterprise Server 10 is supposed to be supports not just BlackBerry anymore, but also does iPhone and Android. But I think Apple can approach this with a fresh code base that BlackBerry just can't, because they have to support so much legacy stuff, whereas Apple's just, hey, here's the new iPhone.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting there too is Microsoft. Part of my heart breaks for Microsoft. I still like Bill Gates. I still like Microsoft as a company, but Windows Mobile and Surface have not proven to be that successful in the market. But they're a company who makes devices. They're a company who makes mobile device management. They name it Muscumdum, which deserves to make Superman flash back into the fifth dimension. But they do Windows Azure, which is remarkable. I mean, iCloud uses Windows Azure in part as a back end. Yet, I've got to think that combined with iOS devices, this is going to hurt Microsoft as well.
Yeah, Microsoft has their Exchange system, which Exchange predates mankind at this point. But Exchange has seen mostly its successes not from hardware. They get success from tying into Outlook, which obviously is mostly installed on PCs. We know that. But when it comes to mobile, I could get Exchange on any of these phones and tablets sitting around me. Even the BlackBerry will support Exchange, and my iPhone and my old WebOS phones, they all support Exchange. And I think, honestly, with the news that we saw coming out of Microsoft over the past few days, they're going to be still doing platform stuff, but transitioning primarily to software services and cloud.
Yeah, they have a lot of mobile first and cloud first.
Yes.
So, Peter, what I found is we got a question. I went by on Twitter, and I forgot the Twitter username, but we got a question about iCloud in an IBM world and what that meant for Apple. And I've got to think it means nothing. I think it's exactly what Tim Cook said, is that there's no overlap here, that iCloud is going to continue to be the consumer solution, while IBM cloud services are positioned exclusively in the enterprise.
Exactly right. Apple has a huge investment in iCloud. It's been building out these data centers for the past few years. The company has a huge amount of infrastructure to do this, and what's more, it's augmenting iCloud with new features in iOS 8 and Yosemite later this year. So I don't think that there's any overlap there. No.
What's interesting to me,
I can see one spot for overlap, and that might be with backups. And that'd be because, if I had a large corporation with lots of sensitive data, I'd prefer my device to be backing up to our service instead of Apple's. But that's a minor part of what iCloud does.
Yeah, I think they're fine with. I mean, in iOS 8, it was curious. Initially, they said that they were going to provide. So with iOS 8, to step back for a moment, back to Derek's point about how they're improving iCloud, we have CloudKit this year, and CloudKit is a quantum leap forward in iCloud. It provides for key stores, provides for blob stores. The new iCloud photo libraries are built on it. The new what's it called is also built on it. I'm blanking on the name, but the stuff that the iCloud Drive is built on top of it. It's hugely functional. But what Apple also did is they provide for third-party data storage hooks into the system. So if you want to use Dropbox, you want to use Box, you can tie into that, and the same view controller that calls up iCloud Drive can call up those instead. And it didn't make that much sense to me because that sounds unusually helpful of Apple. But if IBM services are going to be part of that in the corporation, that's fine. You just you add that in, and then that's your cloud data provider, your cloud storage. It's where your documents go. It's where your backups go. All of that stuff managed, and now that feature makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that you're on the right track.
Yeah, and I think in Mavericks too, you can. I'm not sure. I know you have the iCloud in the Finder, but I believe there's Finder extensions as well, right?
Finder extensions in Mavericks or in
not
Yosemite?
Mavericks, sorry, Yosemite.
Yeah, Yosemite definitely.
So I mean, there's no mention of Macs really in this, and I don't know what the Mac's role in the enterprise is going to be. But Apple likes to provide integrated solutions, so I'm guessing if you have one, it'll be just as awesome in the enterprise as the iOS devices are.
I mean, looking at the press release, they realize that they're not going to take PCs away from businesses. It's just not going to happen. There's a reason that Windows dominates and continues to dominate the business world, and that's simply because of the force of the custom apps and everything that's been built for that. And that's probably not going to change, but they realize what is going to change is just PC in general is going to fade away into the background. There'll still always be that place for trucks in business, but they know that the majority of people would prefer, if I can just bring my corporate-issued iPhone down and slap it in a dock and have it appear on my screen, I'd much prefer that than having to have a laptop and my corporate iPhone, or just have a tablet and do it all. And I think that this is more about looking towards the future of where business will be going instead of gearing up for where business is today.
Yeah, what's interesting to me there, too, and Peter, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but some people have been talking like this is mostly an iPad play and iPhone is coming along for the ride. I think Derek is right in the extent that I don't think this is about replacing Windows laptops in enterprise or Windows desktops in enterprise with Mac desktops and laptops, but by replacing as much as possible those PC laptops with iPads.
Right, exactly. Since that's a trend that's already been rolling for a while now anyway, that would seem to make the most sense.
All right. Let's see. There's more. I mean, a lot of the stuff to me is impenetrable. I was remarkably impressed with how well Tim Cook spoke enterprise. I'm sure that's from his Compaq days that he remembers those. But here's an example. Mobile solutions that transform business. The companies will collaborate to build IBM Mobile First and iOS solutions, a new class of made-for-business apps targeting specific industry issues or opportunities in retail, healthcare, banking, travel and transportation, telecommunications, and insurance, among others. They'll become available starting this fall and into 2015. That's another thing. I think, regardless of how you translate this, one of the messages there is that it's going to take time. Like this, the partnership also negotiated completely in secret. I don't recall seeing a single leak for this. You guys?
No, not at all.
Yeah, Tim Cook does not leak. But this will take a while to ramp up. So if you're running to your IT guy today, please do run to your IT guy today. It's worthwhile doing it, but it'll take time to roll out. The mobile platform. IBM Mobile Platform First for iOS will deliver the services required for end-to-end enterprise capability from analytics, workflow, and data and cloud storage to fleet-scale device management, security integration. Enhanced mobile management includes a private app catalog, data and transaction security services, and productivity suite for all IBM Mobile First and iOS solutions. In addition to an on-premises software solutions, all these services will be available on Bluemix, IBM's development platform on the IBM Cloud Marketplace. Derek, worse or better than military talk?
That's still better. I would say honestly, probably enterprise is Tim Cook's native language. We forget, he's CEO now, but he was COO before, and that's pure enterprise and management. And what we see of Tim Cook is him getting up on stage and making presentations or being on. He speaks enterprise very well when he's on the quarterly conference calls.
SAT. Customer SAT.
Yeah, he talks customer SAT and all the other stuff that is needlessly abbreviated. But I think Tim Cook is still very much an enterprise guy first. He's obviously stepped back and let, say, Johnny Ive take the reins of design, and he's more focused on the business aspects of the business, which includes, very importantly, customer satisfaction. And I think that will bode well for them when they actually do this move into the enterprise space, because Tim Cook knows enterprise.
Tim Cook knows enterprise. That should be an ad.
Tim Cook is enterprise.
Mobile service and support. Apple Care for Enterprise will provide IT departments with end users with 24/7 assistance and Apple's award-winning customer support group and on-site service delivered by IBM. Part of the thing here, Peter, part of the message that seems to be below the level at least, is that they want to treat businesses as human beings. And sort of the message is that current solutions treat you like a cubicle in a gray box, and they want to make sure that you're a person.
Well, I think part of it also is reaching out to people who are already using iOS devices in business, maybe just incidentally, and offering them more services that they can use to do more with their business, and offering the businesses greater flexibility for using iOS devices as well. Apple has had these efforts in the past to gradually increase its enterprise viability for iOS devices, and these vertical markets that depend on iOS devices, whether they be iPads or iPhones. This bolsters that. This gives Apple a development partner for some of this stuff, whose strength is this, whose entire reason for being really is this sort of stuff. So it's a pretty powerful combination.
All right, so before we move on, let me just get some of your gut instincts. So, Peter, is this going to be one of those press releases that's a big deal now, but a year from now we don't hear anything about it, 2 years from now it sort of faded away? Or is this going to be a thing? Like, do you think Apple has a real shot of getting significant penetration into enterprise?
I don't think this is going to be a thing that we're going to look back on 6 months or a year from now and say, oh my God, that was the sea change for, Apple and enterprise. I think that this is going to be a gradual effort between the two of them. I think it's going to yield fruit over long periods of time. I suspect it's going to be an ongoing thing, but I also suspect a lot of it is going to be in the background, and this really isn't consumer-facing information, so I'm not really sure how much relevance it's going to have as part of our news cycle.
Yeah, I don't know that either. What's interesting, though, at least to me, Derek, I'm going to ask you the same question, but in a slightly different way, is Apple's business right now is primarily iPhones. The iPhone is the most successful business that any of us have seen this decade. They make so much money off of it. The iPad doesn't make quite as much money, but it's also hugely profitable. But a lot of the low-hanging fruit is gone. For example, China Mobile was massive growth opportunity, and Apple crossed that off the list last year. So people keep asking, where do you go next? And enterprise is a place they can go next. But do you think enterprise is a huge potential customer for Apple. Do you think they'll have success in getting those sales?
I think they will, mostly for the fact that by offering these integrated systems with IBM, they're going to be offering the CIOs that make these purchasing decisions an easier way to satisfy their CEO's demands of being able to use their iPhone on their corporate network, or having an iPhone and ditching their old, BlackBerry 8700. Like Peter, I think it will be gradual, but I also think that we'll be able to look back, not necessarily in 6 months from now, but 5 months from now, and say that was a turning point for Apple and enterprise, because there was only so much that Apple could do on their own in enterprise without having to build this massive set of services and support that IBM is going to be able to bring to the table. I'm not sure it's going to be huge for Apple's growth, though. It'll continue to be Well, it's the thing is that the corporate market and enterprise, I think it's a big market, but I don't think it's as huge as we might like to think it is. It's big money, of course, but not necessarily massive in device sizes when compared to the 50 million iPhones that Apple will sell in a quarter. I think the big growth opportunities are still going to come in places like Southeast Asia eventually.
So Bong Bong in the chat room is saying the real money is consumer sales, but enterprise sales help to flatten the ups and downs of the product cycle. And that's interesting because we've seen with the consumer sales cycle of the iPhone that, for example, when a new model comes out, massive spike in sales, hundreds of, tens of millions of devices get sold almost immediately, and then it starts to flatten out, and when it gets towards the end of the product cycle, there's much less sold until the new device is announced. But enterprise doesn't buy that way. Enterprise purchases tens of thousands at a time, if not more, and they have usually longer buying cycles, and they're not often on the latest hardware. They buy and then they sit on that for a while. So it's quite possible that the enterprise sales cycle will complement the consumer one. One of the other things I was wondering is, Apple's been bitten by partnerships before. Famously, they worked with Microsoft on the Mac, and then Microsoft went and made Windows. They worked with Google and Samsung on the iPhone, and then Google went and made Android, and Samsung went and made Galaxies. But because of this complementary nature, Peter, I think this is probably the safer alternative. I was joking with Jim Dalrymple on the Vector show that there's the odds of a Lotus Notes phone is really, really small. So I think, as partnerships go, I think this is probably a smart one for Apple.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree as well, except that when Apple was working with Google, there was no overlap between their businesses. When Apple started working with Samsung, their overlap was Samsung made feature phones.
Well, Google was making Android, but it looked like a BlackBerry clone at that point.
Right, and nobody knew about Android at that point.
But I don't see a feature phone or a BlackBerry clone in IBM's current lineup.
I don't think IBM has those ambitions. IBM has pared back their ambitions from what they used to be and focused entirely on a business that's served them very well.
Although a Lotus Notes phone with that little, ThinkPad button would be pretty sweet. No.
A nipple phone?
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Betterment. So what if managing your investment portfolio was as easy as using your favorite iPhone app? It is now with Betterment, the most popular automated investment service with over 36,000 customers. Betterment has seamlessly integrated technology and years of investment expertise into one elegant application that will transform the way you invest. Betterment's user experience and user interface are adored by tech and design enthusiasts alike, especially since sign-up is quick, doesn't involve all the red tape that other investment providers. The platform customizes a globally diversified portfolio based on your personal goals and time horizon. Once you're invested, everything is automated, from rebalance and tax minimalization to regular deposits from your bank account. With killer technology under the hood and iPhone and Android apps to make it easy to check your progress on the go, it's hard to believe that Betterment is as low cost as it is. Investing with Betterment saves you time and money, improves your returns, and minimizes your taxes. And for a limited time, Betterment is offering iMore listeners up to 6 months of automated investment management for free when you visit betterment.com/iMore. So once again, for Betterment for iMore listeners, go to betterment.com/iMore, 6 months of automated investment for free. And as someone who finds investment painful, if not excruciating, I highly recommend automating as much of it as is inhumanly possible. Peter, you wrote something that we get asked over and over and over again, and that is, when do we buy our next Mac? And I got asked this question, I think, 4 or 5 times on Twitter the last couple days alone. Is it safe to buy a MacBook Air? Is it safe to buy a MacBook Pro? Is Apple going to rev the iMac? When should I get it? When, Peter? When should we get our Macs?
When you need one.
Wait, that's too easy an answer.
It sounds flippant, but it's really not. I mean, here's the thing: we can make educated guesses all we want, or uneducated guesses, as the case may be, about what Apple's product cycle is going to be on new Macs, and certainly we can infer from past behavior what future behavior is going to be. We know that there are hardware announcements coming later this year. If we look at Apple's history, it suggests that the MacBook Pro, at least, will be refreshed sometime this fall. But beyond that, it's kind of hard to look in that crystal ball and know anything about what Apple's going to do on its hardware side, at least when it comes to the Macintosh, because the Mac is a little bit different from the iPhone. It is not quite as dependent on the same regular hardware cycle that the iPhone is for its sales. What's more, the future development of the Macintosh is dependent on the creation of new and better microprocessors from Intel, because unlike the iPhone, where Apple controls the silicon, inside the phone by making its own chips, Apple doesn't have that same control over the Macintosh. So the Mac uses Intel chips. In some cases, it uses discrete graphics processors that are made by NVIDIA or AMD. Which means that Apple has to do a lot more coordination when it comes to figuring out what the upgrade path to the Macintosh is going to be. To complicate things even more, Intel is working at something of a deficit right now because its next generation chip, Broadwell, which is the sequel to last year's Haswell microprocessor that Apple refreshed the Macs with, is coming out later than expected. It isn't going to be in widespread distribution until the beginning of 2015. Although there's some indication that some vendors, maybe Apple, will get chips sooner than that, which gives possibility to the idea that you might be able to get a refreshed Mac of some kind with a Broadwell chip in it. Broadwell is going to provide even better graphics performance, even better power efficiency than Haswell does, so it may be an upgrade worth waiting for. But I have been asked this question over and over and over again in the 15 years that I've written about the Macintosh full time. And my answer is always the same. Buy a new computer when you need it. And accept that whenever you buy that new computer, it is going to be obsolete in a matter of weeks, months, whatever. And not necessarily obsolete, but replaced with a better machine. Just get over it. Buy the machine that you need when you need it, and don't worry about what's coming down the pike. It's too hard to try to figure out, what you're going to be missing or giving up when new machines are ready. Just be happy with the one that you've got.
Yeah, when a new machine comes out, it doesn't make your current machine any less functional.
Yes, it does. It obsoletes it immediately, Derek. That's what the internet told me.
It's obsolete, but it still works.
Yeah,
the Model T will still get me to work. It may be slow, but it will still do the job.
Today, tomorrow, and the next day, I agree with you. But the problem is when you see marketing-led engineering decisions, or planned obsolescence and stuff, or just cool new features that you're not going to be able to get. We saw this a few weeks ago when I posted a thing about
handoff, all the continuity stuff.
Thank you. Handoff and continuity in iOS 8 and OS 10. It's pretty apparent that stuff is going to be at least partly dependent on Bluetooth 4.0, Bluetooth Low Energy, which is dependent on having Bluetooth LE in your Mac. And not everybody who's got a Mac that can run Mavericks or Yosemite can run Bluetooth LE, or has a Mac equipped with Bluetooth LE. So it's...
But still, that doesn't make your computer any less functional. It's not new functionality you're going to get, but it will still do everything it did the day you bought it.
Agreed. But it does give some potential buyers pause about what they're going to be giving up by buying today instead of tomorrow. The bottom line is, if you can wait, you're never going to be disappointed with waiting, because it's not like Apple replaces its computers with worse computers.
Unless you like ports and optical drives.
Right, exactly. It's not like the newer systems are any slower or less capable than the older systems are. So the longer you wait, the better off you are. But buy the machine you need when you need it.
Do you guys remember Bloom County?
Of course.
Yes.
I might have said this before, but one of my favorite Bloom County cartoons was when Opus was at the computer store to buy the brand new Banana Junior computer, and he buys it right at the counter, and then he goes to the other end of the counter, and there's a garbage can to throw it away because it's already obsolete. And then, Burke Breathed was making fun of the computer cycle, but that's always stuck with me. And I'm curious to what you guys actually do personally. What I do is I have a first generation Nehalem Mac Pro behind me, and I think that's 2009 or 2010, maybe 11, but I think it's 2010. Roughly, I have a first-generation Retina MacBook Pro, which I use for all stuff around the house, and then I have a MacBook Air, a 2013, the Haswell MacBook Air that I use for traveling. And I don't know when I'm going to replace those. Like the Retina MacBook Air, if it is announced, might be super attractive. Maybe I can combine it, but I don't feel the need that I used to feel to get new stuff all the time. Derek, how often do you upgrade your Macs?
I'm on my third Mac, which is a Retina MacBook Pro first generation like yours. And I replaced a 3-year-old Mac with that, which I had replaced a 3-year-old Mac with that previously. And they've all been 15-inch MacBook Pros. And that's been the only computer I've had since I switched to Mac, only one at a time. Actually, no, I still have my ancient tablet PC, but it doesn't turn on anymore.
Oh, that thing is so thin.
But yeah, I just have the one computer, and I upgraded when I saw a computer that was more attractive to me for the price than what I currently had. And right now, my MacBook Pro is when did the Retina MacBook Pro come out?
2012.
2012.
2012. Okay, so it's 2 years old at this point. And it's not as great as the newest ones, but it still does everything I need it to do. I may not have continuity or whatever when it comes out, but I'll survive until I
think those have Bluetooth LE. I think those have Bluetooth LE. I'd be surprised if they didn't.
2011, I think, was the dividing line.
Yeah, so when the new Macs come out, I'll take a look at them, and if they tickle my fancy enough that I'm willing to plop down $2,000+ to get the one spec'd out how I need, then I'll do it. If it's not, then I'll wait.
What about you, Peter?
Well, I am podcasting from a 2008 Mac Pro that is still going strong. And as much as, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, Rene, as much as I would love to justify getting a new Mac Pro to replace it, one of those shiny new black ones, I can't because it's a workhorse. It still boots up every day and works just fine. So, I'm very content to keep it and keep it going for as long as I can, but it is very long in the tooth, and with each progressive software update I put on it, it gets a little, less responsive. And I've put in more RAM, I've put in an SSD, it's all good, but there it is. Now, my daily driver, what I do most of my writing on, is a 15-inch MacBook Pro that I got in 2013. It was replaced with Haswell MacBook Pros about 6 months after I got mine. I don't regret it. I think that the one that I have is a spectacular machine. It's the fastest laptop I've ever used. And I know that the new ones are incrementally better in terms of power efficiency. They've got faster Wi-Fi. They've got some other bells and whistles that I don't have on mine. But this thing is perfect for what I'm doing, so I'm very happy to keep using it. And I will, if past is prologue, I will probably beat this one into the ground. I usually work all of my MacBooks until they're in pieces.
I think that's. I like that you did. I think it was a year or so ago. It was before the new Mac Pros were announced. You did a couple posts on how to get the most out of your older Mac, and it was things like upgrading the drives. So upgrading the drives to SSD, upgrading the RAM. Some people recently have said that they've had a lot of luck just rip and replacing the operating system, backing up, doing a fresh install, putting their stuff back on. It gets rid of if you've upgraded since maybe Panther or something, just upgrades in place. That's
a lot of
some people have.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in not using Migration Assistant or updating or upgrading your operating system if you can avoid it. If you can live with a few days or hours of discomfort, doing a clean install is one of the smartest things that you can do to try to get your Mac up to optimal performance levels. It's really interesting. We don't realize just how much of the stuff that we've installed over the years gets carried forward, and our operating systems become like digital lint brushes for this stuff.
We have a couple people who are saying we're not answering their questions fast enough. We try to do the questions when we're actually talking about the subject, otherwise it's kind of jarring. So if you're asking a question about an iPod Touch or an iPhone, we haven't gotten there yet. We won't forget you, but we just haven't gotten there yet. So I think that all is really good advice. one of the things with me, for example, I like that Mac Pro too, but it's a Rev A board. And yes, I got the first generation Retina Mac Pro, and I also got a first generation MacBook Air. I've been happier when I've waited for that second generation model, because even if there's no difference, sometimes it's just a little, the GPU is just a little bit faster, so the animations are a bit better, or they fix one thing or another. So I'm typically happy to wait too. But I think computers are different. I think we're going to see the tablet life cycle will maybe be interesting for us to see, because I'm not sure. Like my mom still uses, and she has an iPad 2 and an iPad 3. I gave her my iPad 3 when I bought the iPad Air, and she uses them interchangeably. She likes the Retina display, but it doesn't really matter that much to her, and she probably would have just kept on using the iPad 2. This year, I think she's interested in getting whatever the second generation Air is, but that's, 4 years in between them, 3 years in between them. Where for phones, people seem, because they're subsidized, you don't see much of the price, and because you got to renew a contract every 2 years, in North America at least, you get that subsidy. So I think people are much more likely to upgrade those, and the new plans make it easier to upgrade faster if you want, like every year. But I think for computers, we've discussed this, Peter, right? Like most computers are so fast that, surfing the web, going to Facebook, doing your email, doing most tasks, your computer will last you a long time.
Well, exactly, and it really depends on how you're using it. If you're using Logic Pro, or if you're using After Effects, or if you're doing video editing, if you're even playing games.
You're playing Arkham Asylum like Guy English.
Right, exactly. You are taxing your computer in a way that quite frankly, most people don't. So you get the computer that you need based on your needs and use it for as long as you can. But if you're similar to the average customer who walks in the door of the store that I work in, you are probably surfing the web, you are checking email, you are maybe running Office, you might be creating some light graphics for your keynote presentation, or doing a work or school related thing in Pages, but you're not necessarily pushing the computer that hard. Creative content professionals, those people push their machines a bit harder. Scientists, engineers, and so on. There are use cases for all of them to get really decked out hardware, but you can certainly, if you think rationally about what your needs are, spend less than you might expect to by careful shopping and careful comparison of what you actually need compared to what you would like in an ideal world.
So, Baby Panther.
The nice thing with buying a Mac is even the cheapest bare bones Mac is still going to be, a relevant, capable computer in 4 or 5 years. They're not like the notebooks of yore where you bought it and it was barely capable then, and 3 years from now you wanted to just throw it back at.
You leave my Dell alone.
Derek raises an excellent point. The nice thing about buying a Mac is that whether you get a $599 Mac Mini or a $29.99 Mac Pro, you're getting a Mac that's outfitted with the exact same suite of software applications from the factory. So, Apple is giving you everything that you need to be productive. And there are lots of apps besides that you can download from the Mac App Store or wherever else you get your applications. Obviously, if you have special needs for your system, if you are doing big graphic renders, or if you're trying to do molecular modeling, or if you are doing CAD CAM and so on, if you have very specialized needs, then you have to tailor your Mac choices accordingly. And you're probably going to have to tweak the amount of RAM that's available, or which storage system that you're working with, or whatever. But the bottom line is $599 Mac Mini, $29.99 Mac Pro, same software on all of them, which goes to show you how scalable and useful the software that you get with the Mac is.
Yeah, some people forget that when they say that Apple is high priced, which is not really true by components, you're also getting OS X, which is a big differentiator. Baby Panther is saying, get one when you need one, Peter. That takes all the fun out of the game.
Yes, it does. Sorry to be a downer.
Baby Panther, I don't know if it's a he or she, but they've got a MacBook going on 6 years. We had another one from MacFem who says, where was it? Isn't this more reason for Apple to move to ARM? I'd love an A8, A9 MacBook Air. And that's a really loaded question. And one of the things I think that's not done often enough when we talk about this stuff is the repercussion analysis, which I've mentioned many, many times. But if you move to ARM on the MacBook Air, yes, you could port OS 10, but then what happens with the apps? Do you have something like Rosetta running so that you can still run Intel binaries? If so, what kind of load does that place on ARM? How well can ARM virtualize? If not, if you run iOS, and I believe at least one of the prototype MacBook Airs on ARM is running iOS, then you've got iOS running iOS apps, and does that mean you have to have a touchscreen? And Apple has absolutely tested Macs, both laptops and desktops, with touchscreens, but they haven't liked them. They don't like the user experience, the ergonomics of doing that. So you got to ask a bunch of questions before you do that. Also, what is the future power imprint of ARM as going up as opposed to Intel coming down with things like, what's the one after the next one after Broadwell? Is it Lake something?
Skylake.
Like, would that be a better experience for the machine? So there's pros and cons. Apple owning the entire stack from the chipset on up for laptops is interesting, but will it make a better product? And at the end of the day, that's what they care about. It's not, they like to have that control, but they absolutely want a really good product. So I'm not sure how well or how soon ARM MacBooks will get there.
Yeah, and also it's not trivial to put a new CPU inside of a computer. The PowerPC to Intel transition took years. It took years for Apple to work the Rosetta stuff out of the Intel transition. It took until Lion, right? Lion?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Is that right? Yeah, Lion was... When did Rosetta... Yeah, somewhere around there, which would have been 5 years after Apple began the Intel transition, before you started getting operating systems that simply wouldn't work with older applications that hadn't been updated for Intel microprocessors. So, is Apple ready to spring another major CPU redesign on Mac developers who, just went through this in the last 8 years? I don't know. Maybe I'm failing to see the forest through the trees here, but it just seems like it's going to create a lot more problems than it's going to solve, at least until ARM performance is so much better than Intel performance that Apple has no choice but to move it. However, I will say that Broadwell's delays certainly don't speak well to Intel, at least for this generation of chips. Broadwell is the last iteration of the same kind of chip architecture that Haswell is. Skylake uses a new socket design, which means different things for the motherboards and the connectivity that are going to be supporting these chips, and that development is happening in parallel with what what's their names? Intel have been doing with Haswell, Broadwell, etc. So hopefully that won't be disrupted by it. But that's supposed to be coming in Q2 of next year.
And
now, is it possible that you mentioned the developer's headache? What about Swift?
Yes, I mean, Swift is a good example for many reasons. So, for, like Apple had the Swift project going on for about 4 years, but they also were looking at things like MacRuby. They were looking at different scripting languages, and that's one of the things with Apple is that they prototype everything, they try everything, they plan everything. As much as John Siracusa hates HFS Plus, Apple's had projects to replace it. They just haven't gone forward with any of them yet, and they have those MacBook Airs running on ARM because one day that'll make sense to them. Whether that's next year or 5 years from now, that's the hard part to say, and it usually takes so many pieces coming together. Maybe Swift is one of them. How do they answer the GPU question? Maybe Metal is part of the aspect for that, because we've all complained about Intel integrated graphics and they're getting better with Iris, but how's PowerVR on a desktop? Or is Apple going to start making their own GPUs? It just opens up so many questions, and we have to think of them, but Apple has to actually do them. So I wouldn't be surprised if Apple announces one of these computers, even next year. It wouldn't surprise me because they've been working on them. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's 5 years before we see them, or maybe by then Apple will have totally different products, or Intel or ARM will have totally different products. That's what makes the future so exciting, is that it's so dynamic. That's my end of my rant for that. We're going to take one more quick break, and I'm going to tell you about the mid-roll survey. So you might have noticed we have sponsors on these shows right now, and we're doing that in conjunction with Midroll. They're the awesome company that are helping us with sponsors. And what we want to do, both of us, is make sure that the absolute best sponsors are on the show, the ones that you find the most interesting, the most intriguing, the most informative, the most insightful, the ones that you'll enjoy the most. So they're going to do a small, short, anonymous survey. It takes no more than 5 minutes. Your answers will help match the show with advertisers that best fit your own sensibilities, your own interests. If you complete the survey, you'll be entered in an ongoing monthly raffle to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Now, we promise not to share your email address. We won't even send you an email unless you win. So please go to www.podsurvey.com/iMore. That's www.podsurvey.com/iMore. Take the survey, enter to a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card, and help us make a better show for everyone. Thank you. All right, so I have a couple more things I want to talk to you guys about quickly. We'll get the phone stuff out of the way. So we've got a couple questions on the phone going on here, and this one is from, let me read this, Madar Turkic Khan. Okay, I apologize if I totally destroyed that name. Should I buy a OnePlus One or wait for iPhone 6? I already have both iOS and Android devices. I'm going to echo Peter's advice here. So my answer to this question is always the same. In fact, everyone at Mobile Nations will tell you the same answer, and that is wait as long as you can to buy your next phone. And when you can no longer wait, when you absolutely have to have it, then buy the best phone on the market for you. Now, as many rumors as we've heard, none of us have seen an iPhone 6. No one outside of Apple has seen an iPhone 6. Or at least very, very few people outside of Apple have seen an iPhone 6. We don't know exact specs. We don't know exact timelines. It's completely amorphous right now. It is that big vat of fog that Doctor Who is still hurtling towards. So if a OnePlus One, if you absolutely need a phone today, get the OnePlus One if it's the right phone for you and enjoy it. If you can wait until fall, wait until Apple announces the iPhone 6. Take a look at it, compare it. I mean, we'll have comparisons. I'm sure Android Central will have comparisons, and figure out which is the best phone for you. So like it says I need an answer immediately. There is no quick answer to this. The quick answer is wait. Wait as long as you can wait.
Answer immediately. It's buy the phone now. The fun thing with the OnePlus One, though, is you aren't going to be able to buy it immediately unless you have an invitation.
It's one of those, you have to queue up for it?
Yeah. It's a goofy system.
This is why. Does it look like a good phone, Dirk? I haven't paid much attention to it, to be honest.
The OnePlus One is essentially the same phone as the Oppo N1, if I remember correctly. It's a top-tier Android phone as far as specs and actually the construction is concerned. And they have a very pared-down version of Android. You can actually just run a stock Android theme on it. They have a whole lot of the heavy customizations that HTC and Samsung and others will put into it. The thing is, OnePlus is a company this is their first phone, and they have no history. Which, I say I would love to own a Tesla, but if I had the money to buy a Tesla, I'd be slightly hesitant because Tesla is a company whose only previous car was a Lotus that they dropped an engine in. And I'm not sure that they will necessarily be around. And you can ask the same thing of Oppo with some of the manufacturing difficulties that they've had. Of OnePlus. And they've got a weird relationship with Oppo. It seems like a decent phone. Also, the pricing is fantastic. It is $300 off contract, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the iPhone won't be that.
For a top tier, for a phone that goes toe to toe with the Samsung S5 and the HTC One M8. So it's a good quality phone if you're looking for an Android phone, especially if you need to get one off contract. But
yeah, the iPhone won't be that. The iPhone will be traditionally starting at $650 off contract. Peter, a question from Ryan Saldana, and this is sort of follow-up to when we were talking about the iPod Touch a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about whether there'd be a new iPod Touch or not. So this is actually an interesting question. Doesn't Apple need to make a 64-bit iPod Touch for developers?
A 64-bit iPod Touch?
Because currently the iPod Touches they have A5 processors, which means they don't have an A7 or more recent processor.
Sure, of course. I'm sorry, yeah.
And typically developers have liked it because they could buy a cheap iPod Touch, use it for test beds, things like that, but they won't be able to test anything like Metal that requires the A7, or they won't be able to test anything that they want to do memory management, for example, with 64 bits.
Well, the fact that Metal is an A7 and later technology, suggests to me that Apple is going to make a big push for the iPod Touch to get at least the A7 processor, because Metal is all about gaming, and the iPod Touch is the funnest iPod ever. So it only makes sense that Apple would really be looking to refresh the iPod Touch as soon as it possibly can with a much better processor than what's in there now. Yeah, I think it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen. I'm just not exactly sure what the time frame is going to be, whether we're going to see that September or October or later.
Yeah, I would like a world where whatever they announce for the iPhone, like for example, if we get a 4.7 and a 6 and a 5.5 inch iPhone, we get a 4.7 and 5.5 inch iPod Touch, because essentially you would have Apple tablets ranging from 4 inches all the way up to essentially 10 inches, and that's not one of Derek's famous Samsung tweets, which I think has been retweeted 800 million times now, Derek.
Yeah, the last version I couldn't even fit in a tweet.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think they need all of those, but every couple inches, every inch of the small scale, I think you get to just choose the right device for your size, and eventually the ones that are the least popular will fall off the radar. Also interesting, I don't know if you guys saw Marques Brownlee's video with the alleged iPhone 6 sapphire glass screen.
No, I haven't actually.
Sonny Dixon, who got a lot of iPhone 5S parts last year, including the gold frames and things, he got his hands on what is supposed to be an iPhone 6 sapphire glass screen. Now, he's had a good reputation, but you never know about these things. I think it'd be hard to hoax it, but also Apple can change their minds about things. They can pull cameras from iPod Touches within weeks before they ship. So you never know with 100% certainty. And also, it's hard to say if it's sapphire or not, because you need some sort of scientific analysis. It could just be some other wonder glass that they put up. But so he put up this video showing how bendable the screen was, and how he took a knife to it, and he took keys to it, didn't leave a scratch on it. Leo on MacBreak Weekly had a spare Galaxy S3 screen, and he took a knife to it. It looked fine. He started to bend it, and it shattered into a bazillion pieces and went for his face. So note at home: don't do the screen bendy thing by itself. Now, it's impossible to tell what a screen is going to do when it's a screen by itself, because it's way more flexible on its own than it would ever be attached to a hard shell on a device. So you can drop a screen. It's also really light. So dropping it is not the same as dropping a phone that has weight and sturdiness behind it. But as we've seen with water-resistant phones, Derek, is this something that still needs to be solved? I mean, I have 2 scratches on the front of my iPhone 5S that I would rather not have. And we know Apple has bought into sapphire plants. There's a lot of rumors about sapphire technologies. As a consumer, if you see sapphire on a box, is that like seeing 64-bit on a box? Is that like something cool that would make you want to buy it more?
As a consumer, when I see sapphire on a box, I think gemstones. I don't think of hardened something that's harder than Gorilla Glass. When I want to think of something that's tough, I think Gorilla Glass, because I've been told that the Gorilla Glass is tough. If you told me it was diamond hard, I might believe you. But I have I don't have any major scratches on my front of my iPhone, but when I get it in the right light, I can see all the scuffs and mini hairline scratches that are on the front of it. And I've dropped it a couple of times and winced every time it went onto the concrete or the asphalt. I think having sapphire on the box isn't necessarily going to be a big selling point, but if you tell me that it has the strongest screen of any smartphone out there, which is typically how Apple would push that sort of thing, have they ever actually admitted that they have Gorilla Glass on the iPhone? When we know it's Gorilla Glass, because Corning says it is.
They did in one statement where they were talking about Apple producing things in the U.S., and they mentioned that the Corning plant was in the U.S.
Right, but when they go on stage to talk about it, they're talking about how it's this new chemically strengthened glass.
Yeah.
And it's fracture resistant and harder to scratch than ever before, even though it's Corning's Gorilla Glass. And I think that's how they'll pitch a sapphire screen. They may say it's a sapphire display cover, but in the end it'll just be it's tougher, which is what you need to know about it.
Yeah, Peter, is ruggedness a quality you'd like to see? Maybe it's waterproofing, maybe it is better glass. Is that a quality that would appeal to you in a phone?
Absolutely, as a consumer, for sure. Yeah, I think that everybody would like their phone to be a bit tougher. I mean, if you haven't had your iPhone screen broken, somebody who has, or you've heard about somebody who has. So anything that Apple can do to strengthen the iPhone, I think, is a positive thing.
So yeah, again, I'll put a link to the video. I think it's been seen 4 million times. What was interesting to me is one of the things I love most about Mobile Nations, if I could step behind the scenes for a minute, go inside baseball, is that we touch so many vectors. Marquez Brownlee, he came with us to CES last year. He was one of the winners of our Mobile Nations CES contest, and he was phenomenal at that show. He did a lot of great videos while he was there. Awesome guy. Not a lot of people, I think, in the mainstream tech media were aware of who he was, and I think that they discounted what he showed a little too quickly, maybe. And whether you want to pick on whether it's an actual Apple part or not, I think that's less interesting. And maybe it could be framed better. To me, maybe if you showed it alongside an iPhone 5S screen, so that I could see what the difference in bending is, what the difference in knife scoring is, what the difference in key scoring is, that would give it more context to me. But we don't cover 95% of the supply chain rumors that come out because I don't think they're reliable at all. I think they just add noise and clutter. But I think it is interesting to keep aware of them because we live in a time now where you're making the OnePlus One Direct. I don't know how many of those are going to make. They're going to make hundreds of millions of these iPhones, and that's not only impossible to keep secret, but that's a very, very hard job to do. Making stuff at that scale, I mean, you've got to have yield rates really high. You've got to have component prices just right. It is completely non-trivial to produce iPhones. If Apple made far fewer of them or made far more different SKUs, it's actually easier in some ways. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing this. And one of the other design things that I liked about it is a couple years ago, I heard a rumor that Apple was going to be doing something similar to the iPod Touch for the next generation iPhone. And that's the rounder design that we ended up seeing in the iPad Mini and the iPad Air. And it made a lot of sense because unifying design direction is often, it's part of your brand. But what I heard last year with iOS 7 is that they were going to make the screen rounder because iOS 7 started to introduce these bezel gestures, like things like the unified back gesture, the unified forward gesture, pulling up things from the side of the screen. And right now the iPhone has a hard edge there. It's very squared off, and it's not the most comfortable motion in the world. But when you look at the screen that Marquez was showing off and the screen that Sonny Dixon showed off after that, they look almost rounded. And I think whether Apple does this or not, I think the idea of a rounder iPhone, and Peter, I think we've spoken about this before, about how nice the original iPhone was.
Yes, indeed.
I would be a big fan of Apple going rounder again.
I would be a big fan of Apple going rounder again as well. In fact, this week I put up a review of a battery case from Sadio that I like because it adds a rounder back to my iPhone 5S. It's more comfortable in my hand that way. Yeah, so I would love to see that happen.
Derek, you've tried a ton of different phones. Do you have a preference in form factor now?
I like the rounded phones. I have 2 of them here. They don't make them anymore. Yeah, they're Palms, of course. But I like the devices that are more rounded overall. The iPhone is very much that flat slab, whereas, say, my Moto X or the HTC One M8, they might actually be thicker, but the way that at the center, but the way that they're curved makes it, and all the way around the edge up to the very front, makes it just fit better in my hand. I like the way that these feel. The iPhone feels great as a machined, high-quality, premium luxury device.
An objet d'art.
Yeah, but when I'm holding it for a long period of time, after a while, it's like I could, you know what, I'm going to file down my nails on the corner here because it's just sharp enough that I can do that. Whereas with these devices, that's not something that I can do.
You could shave with the pre-keyboard.
Yeah. This one I can maybe comb my hair with it. But
here's the original iPhone and the iPhone 3G. And you can see the 3G has a very similar sort of a curve to it, and that was done to fit it, to basically make it look thinner than it really could be. Apple's original Purple Experience Project phone, the prototype was very similar. The designs were very similar to an iPhone 4, and it took years for them to be able to make that design. And I think now I think the iPhone 5 was as close to Johnny Ive's form iPhone as possible, and they're starting to look beyond that now, which I think is good.
I'm okay with that. I like a little more personable of a device. The sharp edges look nice, but they aren't necessarily the most comfortable thing ever.
Bong Bong in the chat room has a question, and I haven't looked at this yet, so maybe one of you has. The ebook settlement. So Apple has supposedly agreed to settle for up to $450 million, and that's with the state's attorneys general and the federal government. But it's a weird settlement. It's like they might owe much less or zero because they have the right to continue with their appeals because Apple still maintains that they did absolutely nothing wrong. I think it's complicated. I think the email conversations were damning. I think if those emails didn't exist, Apple would have a much stronger case. Like I think they did the right thing in the wrong way, and these are one of those things that it was very Steve Jobs. It was the way that he worked, but it's something that Tim Cook now has to deal with. It has let Amazon get into a position where I think it's actually worse for consumers when it comes to ebooks, and we've seen that with Hachette, and we've seen that with other publishers where Amazon just refuses to advertise their books unless they give them more and more money. And I think one independent, I don't know how big they were fairly significant size, said that Amazon asked for 30%, then 40%, now wants 50%, and they're basically unchecked. And I think that in terms of trying to stop what the U.S. government considered antitrust, they've created a worse problem. And yes, they're single focus. They don't consider other factors. But I think it would have probably behooved the judge, Denise Cote, who I still think is running a complete kangaroo court in that building, to have considered that. Peter, have you spent any time looking at this?
Apple makes like $4,500 a second or something like that. So I think 450 million or whatever it is serious. Seriously, it's couch cushion money for Apple. I
agree with that, but it's the monitor and the inability to do those kinds of deals, I think. I think they should have struck the most favored nation clause and left the rest alone.
I agree, and I agree with your comments about the court. I think that the way that it's been handled so far has been ridiculous, and I think that Apple's counting on that because Apple is continuing the appeals process, but they want to put this behind them, and this is one way to do it.
Derek, do you have any ebook thoughts?
No, the whole thing is, I get technology. The whole legal stuff is way over my head.
Courts have been disappointed lately.
Yeah, generally when the government gets involved in things, even if they're trying to do the right thing, it normally doesn't turn out as well as they or we would have hoped. And from what I've been able to discern, Apple, they also were trying to do what they thought was the right thing for themselves and for their customers. But like you said, went about it the wrong way, and it's backfired badly on them.
I think that's fair. So we'll probably have something on this eventually. It was so much other chaotic news this week. The last thing I want to ask you guys is we've been discussing the iWatch idea for a while, and we've talked about fitness bands. For example, could Apple be making something cheap that just goes on your wrist that'll provide minimal things in terms of notifications, maybe a sound, maybe a light, whatever, but just do a lot of sensory input? Could they be making something the way Android Wear works, like the new Samsung Live or the LG G Watch or the upcoming Moto 360, which tries to put iOS and a display, almost like the iPod Nano, on your wrist, or like the Pebble on your wrist, and do things like notifications, do interface, do remote control for home automation, do security maybe with Bluetooth, trusted objects, do a lot of those sort of things, logging diagnostic information. Or one of the more recent things is, could Apple do a luxury watch? Like, for example, they've hired somebody from Tag Heuer. They've got a lot of people. Angela Ahrens is from fashion. They've got even Jimmy Iovine on in the company now. Derek, you have a nice watch. Could you see Apple doing something? I mean, Kevin Mitchell's original dream for the iWatch was something that was $1,000 or more. That was a beautiful piece of jewelry that also happened to have some smarts inside it.
I have a decent watch. It was like $200 watch. It's nothing super fancy. I liked it because it was thin and it looked nice and it told the time. But oddly enough, I'm not even wearing it right now.
See?
When it comes to that sort of stuff, I can't see Apple producing a $1,000, $2,000, $10,000 iWatch. They would be lampooned in the press for that, and they know that. And also, they wouldn't sell nearly as many of them as they would want. I think when they release something in the probably $200 to $300 range, they will sell millions of them. If I had to guess, the thing you mentioned, Android Wear is not so much like an iPod Touch or the iPod Nano. It's entirely dependent upon your phone. There are a few things that you can do on it on its own, but 90% of what you're going to do on is paired up through your phone. And I imagine an iWatch will be the same way. It will be mostly useless as a standalone device.
You can't put a powerful radio on your wrist unless you want to burn your wrist off still.
Yeah. I think that notifications, interaction with Siri, especially now that Notification Center has interactive widgets available in iOS 8, I think that would be something that would actually be beneficial on an iWatch type device. I think mostly it will be about getting interactions to your phone and relaying data to your phone from your body. I definitely, every indication with the hires and the patents that Apple's put out, but the reasonable patents that Apple has put out is that this device is going to have a lot of sensors built into it, not just motion sensors, but health sensors. That'll be a big play for them.
One of the things I keep thinking, Peter, is in terms of the iPod, and I might have said this before, but the iPod line is long in the tooth. It doesn't make much money anymore, and one of the biggest problems with it is those are Apple's original wearables. The iPod Nano, the iPod Shuffle, both of those have been wearable. People even got armbands to wear, the iPod Classic if they wanted to have lots of music for training and things like that. But they don't run iOS. They're not connected to the cloud. Most of them are not connected in any way. Some of the newer ones have Bluetooth, but they're not significantly connected, and that's a big problem. Apple probably wants to get iOS on that platform. So I wonder if we could see a range of iWatches eventually, the same way we have a range from the iPod Shuffle, which is really cheap, doesn't even have a screen, all the way up to the iPod Classic, which for people like you with massive music collections is the only workable solution. Could we have, for example, an iWatch style band that just does the sensor, like the logging connection for people who only want to spend $50, going all the way up to $700 or $800 for a Classic for people who want a nice looking timepiece on their wrist that does different things than the version that's like the iPod Touch of watches, which is sort of like more of a computer screen.
I want the Coke Freestyle of iPod watches or of iOS watches. I want 100 different flavors. That's a valid question. There's no question that the iPod market has diminished. It's been cannibalized as more and more people buy iPhones, quite frankly, because they have the same the same functionality as the iPod Touch, but more because they can actually make phone calls too and work away from Wi-Fi, obviously. Having said that, Apple still makes a lot of money with iPods, so I'm not sure that Apple needs necessarily to duplicate that capability or even that business model for a hypothetical wearable. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I think that Apple's going to dip its toe in first, see what happens, and then over time we'll probably evolve it. And we see the iPhone 5S, the iPhone 5C, we see the iPad Air, the iPad Mini, we see this range of iPods. Apple certainly has a lot of experience diversifying its product line as it needs to, and as it sees market opportunity.
And that diversification usually comes over time. There was the iPod, and then there was the iPod 2, and then the 3, and then I think the iPod Mini finally came out.
Yeah, and then the Nano.
So I have no doubt that if the iWatch proves to be successful, that there will be other, obviously follow-on models, but also a branching out into different versions of an iWatch. But initially, I think there's just going to be iWatch.
I love how Peter just said Apple's going to dip their toe into watches like it's the Atlantic and not the Indian Ocean. It's cold, got to be careful. Can't go too quickly.
There's sharks in there and other things.
A couple of quick hits. Epic, the Unreal team, Peter, shipped the first version of their engine that works with metal, which is exciting.
Yes, indeed. Mark Rain has really been Mark Rain at at Epic Games has really been clued into Apple's development cycle for a long time now. I've seen him at a lot of events, and Epic is very invested in making sure that Unreal, which for the uninformed is a game engine that gets used by a lot of game developers, both for mobile devices like iOS and also for PCs and consoles. Making sure that this technology works as well as it can with Apple hardware and Apple software. So it didn't surprise me at all that they came out with this so early.
I think that is absolutely terrific. I'm going to move us quickly along because I think Peter and I are both melting with lack of air conditioning already.
Yes, I am.
We're going to get typed a new Mac Markdown. I'm actually really impressed. I'm not surprised. Markdown is so easy. We use it at iMore. A lot of companies use it. Markdown is John Gruber's language for quickly marking up things like blog posts and stuff. Google has released an official analytics app for iOS, which I tried, and I think it's actually better than their website. So that is exciting. Also, Marco Arment of Instapaper and the magazine fame has released Overcast, his long in development, longer than he's probably thought in development podcast client. I was on the beta. I wrote a review of it yesterday. It's very typical of Marco Arment. It is incredibly well considered. It is incredibly opinionated, but he does have a lot of settings. If you disagree with one of his preferences, not his opinions, you can easily change it. Do you listen to podcasts on your iPhone, Derek?
I do not.
You do not, Peter? Do you?
I am ashamed to admit that I do not.
So I do, and I listen to them. I don't drive very much anymore because my commute is from my bedroom to my office.
That's exactly why I don't either.
But I do listen to them, when I'm out walking, when I do drive, and when I'm going to sleep. And Overcast has been working fabulously well. A lot of really smart things in there. Rumor has it he used Debug and Guy English to test the smart silence skipper. So you can you see at the end of watching a podcast, this has saved you 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes because it skips the pauses. It's also got automatic balancing if you want to make a podcast loud enough to actually hear. A lot of really clever stuff in there. So check that out. And as always, Peter does our daily app updates. We have imore.com/apps, and we have our new app galleries that you can go to. There's a big button in the sidebar, and those are our editor's choice apps, and we've been adding a ton of games lately. So we're going to have a ton more information on that. Whew, breath time. I think that's enough for this week. I'll stop us there. I mean, we could go on for several more hours, but I would melt. Derek, thank you for joining us. You're always a delight.
I'm happy I could be here.
If people want to find out more about you, if they want to read more of your smart stuff, if they want to follow you on the socials, where can they go?
You can find me all over Mobile Nations, which would be Android Central, Connectedly, Crackberry, WP Central, and iMore.com, where I write about all things mobile and now connected. And you can find me on Twitter at DKDSGN.
Nice. And Peter, sir?
I am on iMore and on the Twitter at Flarg, Flargh.
And I want to thank everybody in the chat room for joining us, for giving us your questions, everyone who sent in questions. We really appreciate it. If you do want to send in questions, you can either put them in the comments for the podcast episode you're listening to now, and we'll pick them up for the next week, or you can email them at any time to podcast@imore.com. Just check the show notes. You can even tweet them to us. We'll do our best to pick them up from there. The best way to listen to the show is live. We are officially in our new time slot now, which is Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. I think that's 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. You can find us there a little bit earlier in the day so we can get the show up a little bit earlier in the day for you. Live is the best way to listen to the show because you get to interact with us. But if you can't, you can find every episode is available on RSS, on iTunes, and on YouTube. We have audio and video. You can find me at iMore, of course, at Mobile Nations. You can also find me at Rene Ritchie on all of the socials. Peter, Derek, thank you again.
Thank you, Rene.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank our sponsor once more, and that is, I'm going there quickly. It's wrong. That is Betterment, the automated investment service built on the idea that investing intelligently should be intuitive, automated, and accessible. For a limited time, you can get up to 6 months free automated investment by visiting betterment.com/iMore. That's betterment.com/iMore. Up to 6 months of free automated investments. Thank you, chat room. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.